Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being part of our panel on re-enfranchising people with felony convictions and making sure that we can reduce barriers to people who are incarcerated so that they can vote as well. I'd like to invite you all to move up and towards the front so we can have a cozy conversation and facilitate Q&A. So my name is Brittany Stonecipher. I'm a voting rights attorney with ACLU of California. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. And the format of our conversation, each of our panelists is going to explain a little bit about the amazing programs that they have to turn out the vote and reduce barriers for incarcerated people or people who are affected by the criminal legal system. And then we're going to dive into some Q&A. But after I introduce everyone, I'll also give a little bit of a background on felony disenfranchisement. So going from my left, first, we've got Daisy Ramirez, who's the jail project coordinator of ACLU of Southern California. Daisy, as the jails project coordinator, her work includes examining and addressing conditions of confinement in county jails and advocating on behalf of individuals in custody to ensure that they have access to basic standards of care. In 2017, she co-wrote Orange County Jails, a 2-year investigative report of the ACLU Southern California Jails Project, which revealed inadequate conditions in Orange County's jail system. In 2018, Daisy helped to launch Unlock the Vote, a voter education and registration campaign working to increase access to voting for justice-involved and justice-impacted people in Orange County. Prior to joining ACLU, Daisy received a Master's of Social Work degree with a concentration in community organizing, planning, and administration from the University of Southern California. She received her bachelor's degree with honors from the University of Chicago. Moving down, we have Jeff Klein. Jeff is the manager of the Voter Education, Outreach, and Community Relations program of the Los Angeles County Registrar of Voters. Jeff oversees civic engagement and community relations legislation and programs related to voters with disabilities and multilingual assistance. He's part of the department that manages the single largest electorate in the United States. He has more than 20 years of experience in elections, 8 years of working on a partisan level, and 12 years working on a nonpartisan administrative capacity. Jeff holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Cal State University of Northridge and a master's degree in public administration and policy from Cal State University Long Beach. Moving along the line, we next have Jen Dean, who's the Deputy Director of Chicago Votes. As the Deputy Director, Jen is a strategist, a youth mentor, and a community organizer inside jails and prisons in Illinois. She ensures that people impacted by the criminal justice system have a seat at the table when policy decisions are being made. And as a coordinator, which she'll talk about more, of the Cook County Jails program, Cook County Jail Votes program, she's helped to register and provide civics education to people in Chicago jails and helped to inspire similar programs across the country. Jen's passion is to cultivate new social justice movements and initiatives such as #Parade to the Polls, #GiveAShitChicago, and Cook County Jail Votes. And last but not least, we have Brendan Woods. Brendan is the public defender of Alameda County. He was appointed to that position in 2012 and has over 20 years of experience in criminal defense litigation and is a nationally recognized leader in public defense. Based on formative experiences in with law enforcement as a young black man, Brendan has dedicated his career to fighting for those who are battling systems of oppression through holistic representation of his clients and the greater community, which includes implementing innovative programs like full-time social workers, an immigrant representation unit, and a voter outreach increases community empowerment, or VOICE program, which registers incarcerated individuals to vote, and which was awarded the Program of the Year award in 2017 from the California Public Defenders Association. He's the first African-American public defender in Alameda County's history, is a board member and former president of CPDA, and was honored with the Wasserstein Public Interest Fellowship from Harvard Law. So a pretty impressive lineup of panelists we have here. So before I hand it over to our amazing panelists to talk about the programs that they've been doing in their communities, I wanted to give you a little bit of a background and context for this issue. So as we've talked about many improvements over the course of the morning to expand the electorate, to make it more inclusive, to reduce barriers to voting, there's been a national movement to do that for people who have convictions as well. And there's been a renewed energy around that movement, I would say over the last 10 years, as we've seen a second generation of voter suppression laws pop up around the country. And it's also come alongside the movement in recent years to reverse the trend towards mass incarceration. We can really see that parallel here in California in particular. So reducing barriers to people with convictions so that they can vote includes restoring the vote to more people who have categories of convictions. It includes registering and turning out the vote for people who have convictions, but or people who don't have convictions, who maybe are awaiting trial, but maybe don't know that they have the right to vote or are facing logistical barriers to casting their vote. And it also includes voter education, because there's a lot of misinformation right now about who can vote when they're impacted by the criminal legal system and who can't. So to give you a little bit of history, in California, unfortunately, we wrote felony disenfranchisement into the state's very first constitution in 1949. And that was actually, obviously, before the Civil War, but felony disenfranchisement nationally was largely tethered to Jim Crow policies. So after the passage of the 15th Amendment saying that restrictions on voting based on race were not allowed, a number of states across the country rushed to include in their constitutions or pass laws that restricted the right to vote for people based on convictions. And unfortunately, in many states, there were specific types of convictions that were designed with the idea that people of color, particularly Black Americans, would be more likely to commit those crimes, while other crimes would not lead you to lose your voting rights. So things like stealing laundry from a clothing line could lose you the right to vote, but murder didn't. So felony disenfranchisement laws really are a legacy of Jim Crow. So California has since rolled back some of the harshness of its felony disenfranchisement laws. We amended the state constitution in 1970. But right now, the state constitution still says that you cannot vote if you are imprisoned or on parole for the conviction of a felony. In recent years, I mentioned that this reform has come alongside criminal justice reform. California had a prison population that was almost 200% design capacity about a little under a decade ago. So one of the ways that we changed that was through something called realignment, which changed where people with low-level felonies served their sentence. It moved them basically to county-level supervision. So then it became less clear than it had been before what it meant to be imprisoned. And we also created new categories of community supervision. So more people were on probation, things like mandatory supervision, and there's a new category called post-release community supervision after this realignment that happened in 2011. So does that count as parole? Who gets the right to vote? So there was some litigation during the years following realignment, and then finally culminating in AB 2466 in 2016, we clarified that only people who are in state or federal prison are imprisoned for the purposes of losing their right to vote, and only state-level parole counts as parole. So the only time you lose your right to vote in California is while you are in state or federal prison or on parole, which means that if you're on county-level supervision, you're in a county jail for a felony, you're in a county jail for a misdemeanor, you have the right to vote. If you're on probation, post-release community supervision, you have the right to vote. But that can be kind of tricky. And what's the difference between probation and parole? A lot of people might not know that. So it's really important that programs like our panelists have do outreach to people to reduce those barriers and make sure people know what their rights are. So to give you some numbers, nationwide, there are 4.5 million people who currently do not have the right to vote because they have a felony conviction. That number was about 6 million people just last year until Florida passed Amendment 4, which restored voting rights to 1.5 million people there. They had lifetime felony disenfranchisement. In California, there are about 80,000 people in county jails who have the right to vote. There are over 300,000 people who are on probation or some other form of county supervision who have the right to vote, but they may not know it. So three of our panelists are from California, so they can talk about that context, but I also wanted to let you know what the law is in Illinois, since that is where Jen is from, and she's going to be talking about her program in Chicago. In Illinois, people only lose their right to vote while they are serving a prison sentence. So Illinois has a more permissive or a more just, perhaps, policy than we have here in California, and they're one of 14 states that allow people to vote as soon as they finish their prison term. So with that, I will turn it over to Daisy to talk about the program that she has in Southern California.
I'm actually going to stand up just so I can see the PowerPoint. Thank you. Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing? Good, awesome. Thank you all so much for having us today. So as Brittany mentioned, my name is Daisy Ramirez. I am the Orange County Jails Project Coordinator, and I also oversee our voter education and registration campaign in Orange County. We kicked off the campaign both in LA and OC. I'll talk a little bit about what happened in LA, but Jeff is also here, so he can provide more information about that. So we kicked off, oh, I have the clicker, sorry. So to talk a little bit about Unlock the Vote. So Unlock the Vote is a voter education and registration campaign aimed at increasing access to voting for justice involved and justice impacted individuals in OC and LA County. The reason why we decided to kick off this work, we had actually initially launched it back in 2004. We didn't collect a lot of data. That was before my time. We didn't collect a lot of information. But in 2016, we were receiving complaints from people incarcerated in LA and OC saying that they were, one, being denied access to voting materials, or two, they weren't receiving their ballots in the jail. So we decided to kind of revamp some of the work and relaunch it. In Orange County, unfortunately, we were denied access to the jail. So an ideal situation would have been where jail officials would have allowed us to go inside and do the voter education registration in person. We were denied, so we had to get a little bit creative. So we were engaged in 3 different activities. The first being the mailers. So we had volunteers that were putting together voting rights materials, and we were sending that into the jails. And then we were also doing voter ed and registration. Post-release, we had partnered with a community-based group who actually stations an RV outside of the Central Jail Complex in the city of Santa Ana in Orange County, Monday through Fridays from 10 p.m. to 3 in the morning, because we have lots of folks that are actually being released overnight. So we partnered with them. We were out there on Fridays talking to people as they were exiting the jail, letting them know about their voting rights and encouraging them to get registered. And then third, we were doing voter ed and registration at the visitor lines. So when a family or a friend would visit a loved one who was incarcerated, we were engaging them outside of the visiting area, again, sharing the information, encouraging them to either, one, provide us the name of their incarcerated loved one so we can send in the info, and also offering to register them. In LA County, we are actually the official court-ordered monitor of conditions of confinement there. So we filed a lawsuit several decades ago, and because of that, we have unfettered access to the facilities. Through our relationship with the Sheriff's Department and also the local election agency, we were able to get volunteers cleared to go inside of the facilities to do the voter ed and registration in person, which is much more effective than having to send in the information and folks having to navigate that process on their own. So we did that. In LA County, we registered over 1,300, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, I think over 1,300 individuals for the general election. And just to provide a little bit of context as to the population that we're talking about, in Orange County is the 9th largest jail system in the country. On any given day, there's about 5,900 to 6,100 individuals behind bars. Over 50% of those folks have not been convicted of the crime that they're facing. And on an annual basis, we have about 60,000 people that are being booked into the facilities, which means that there's a lot of kind of in and out that's happening, which makes it difficult when we're mailing in information, because someone that may be there on Monday may be out on Friday by the time that they, get their ballot or an application. LA County is the largest jail system in the world. On any given day, there's about 17,000 people behind bars. Similar to Orange County, more than 50% of those individuals have not been convicted of the crime that they are facing. A majority of the folks in custody, both in Orange County and in LA County, are folks of color. Orange County, 63% of individuals are Latinx and Black folks, and in LA County, I believe it's about 80%. This is just some data. I don't want to get too much into it because I know we're kind of doing like a high-level rundown of our program, but just to kind of showcase the type of low turnout that was happening in Orange County during the last primary election. I believe that there were no more than 5 ballots that were issued to people in custody. So again, keeping in mind that there's about 6,000 people behind bars on any given day, more than 50% of those people still have not been convicted, and there's 5 ballots that are being issued to folks inside of the facility. And the yellow bar kind of shows the increase that has happened since we've engaged in this work. And that just kind of has a rundown. But again, a big focus of our campaign is education, registration, and turnout. We want to ensure that people that are registering to vote actually end up being able to cast a ballot, either behind bars or if they're released, that they're able to do so out in the community. One of the things that is very important to us and that we noticed throughout our work was the importance of education. Not only navigating a voter registration application or navigating a ballot, but also talking about, what type of things are going to be on the ballot. I vividly recall there was a gentleman who I spoke to that was incarcerated during the general election, and he said, I have no idea what the Secretary of State does. I have no idea what the Attorney General does. So it's also thinking about the importance of like a Civics 101 and being able to provide this information to people where they're currently at, and if that's behind bars, ensuring that we're taking that information to them. We are going to be implementing some changes moving on to kind of later this year, 2020. In Orange County, we will no longer be doing the mail-in packets because through the work that we did, there was a lot of concerns that came up around delays with incoming and outgoing mail, where people were saying, once a mail gets to the jail, it still takes about 10 to 15 days to actually get to me in my cell. So that created a lot of challenges for us. So what we're going to be doing in partnership with the local election agency in Orange County, who has been very supportive of our work, we're going to be hosting trainings, and we're going to be training folks that already have access to the facilities. People that are going in to teach academic courses, people that are going in to teach restorative, transformative justice. We're going to be training them so then they can register their clients or their students. We're also going to be working with the Public Defender's Office after hearing about the amazing work that was happening in Alameda County. And then just to share some quick pictures before my time is up. So here are some pictures of the work that was happening in LA, and I can just kind of scroll through these quickly. So I want to be mindful of time. But, so these pictures showcase the work we were doing in LA and both and in Orange County out at night and also at the visitor lines. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daisy. So next, Jeff is also going to talk about the program that they have down in LA.
Okay, thanks for having me here. How's everyone doing today? Hopefully you're enjoying this great conference. I'll try to add to it rather than detract from the conference. So I'm going to actually grab mine. So I'm going to talk about the LA Free the Vote program. There's another program called Free the Vote, or legislation making its way through California called Free the Vote. This is a LA-specific program, and this was developed in partnership with a number of entities that I'm going to discuss while we're going through this. But this is one of several programs, and actually one of the themes I'm going to stress is that In terms of election administrators, every program is not the same. You really have to pay attention to the interesting differences about each program, but at the same time, you can pull from other programs that exist. So this is based a lot on our NVRA program that we have in LA County, but it's not NVRA, and there's a lot of different requirements and strategies. So the structure's similar, but it's also modified to really accommodate this program, which is LA Free the Vote. So I'm going to give some background first on LA County. Actually, going back to 2000, the LA County Board of Supervisors directed the Sheriff's Department and the Registrar's Office to work on registering folks who are incarcerated in the LA jails. That was initially called Voting While Incarcerated, and that program has been ongoing in LA for a while. Starting in December of 2015, the Sheriff's Department decided to invest more resources in the program. They dedicated more staff. They actually moved it to a new unit where there would be more staff working on it, where previously they really only had 1 or 2 people working on the entire program. And as Daisy just mentioned, you know how big LA County jail system is, so thinking there's 1 or 2 people working on a program for the entire county, that's pretty surprising. So it was nice to see them add more staff and have a whole unit really work on this. And they also started working more proactively with our department, asking for best practices and recommendations, and together we've been able to really improve logistically how we administer the election and get ballots to inmates and then get those ballots back to our offices. Our program increased further. In 2017, the ACLU got further involved, and they've been a fantastic partner in really bringing a lot of organizations that exist in LA County that have been doing this work for a long time and really bringing everyone together under one umbrella where we can all partner, and I'll show you what the effects of that have been. In 2018, the Board of Supervisors passed a couple motions, initially establishing a program to have county agencies and stakeholders work together, and then in July, they officially created the task force, which we then named LA Free the Vote. The original task force, the directive was to work with justice-involved individuals. So it really expanded beyond just the jail system, and it expanded to probation, the public defender, and the alternate public defender's office, in addition to the jails program that we'd already had. But task force for justice-involved individuals is a kind of a difficult name to say, kind of a mouthful. So that's why we came up with LA Free the Vote. All right, so this is a little bit of a visual of sort of our evolution of a partnership. So initially, as I mentioned, starting in 2000 and really all the way through 2015, it was really just the Registrar's Office and the Sheriff's Department. In 2016, we started expanding and the ACLU got further involved. So really we created this 3-team partnership where everyone had specific roles and responsibilities. And then in the middle of last year, all the way through right now, pretty much, we really expanded to create this formal task force where we have a lot of partners included. And actually, I noticed there's a number of partners from different organizations who are at the conference today, so it's really great to see. And everyone's been able to give input. In fact, LA Free the Vote actually came out of this task force because we wanted to know, what do communities that these organizations work with, what would resonate with such individuals? What's a good name? And so you really have great resources where you can bounce information and ideas off of these partners. This is not to minimize the work that a lot of these partners and these organizations did before 2018, but really we've been able to coordinate a lot better. Okay, so tracking performance. So the top are the 3 highest performing elections for, this is just within the jails, highest performing elections. And you can see that at most in 2012 for the general election, it was over 1,200 registered and 661 ballots returned. Just in 2018, we actually have seen those numbers increase, and this is the direct result of those partnerships. So now we have a midterm election that's performing like a high-volume presidential election. And we expect that number to increase even more. I did put a note here because in the November election, one would expect more interest in the general election, but sometimes there's saturation where you're going back to the jail facilities and folks have already been registered and already been worked with through the partnership organizations. Okay, so As I mentioned, it's good to take bits and pieces from programs in your county or in your agency or wherever that work, but also you need to modify it slightly. So there's really two sides to the LA Free the Vote. There's what we do in the jails, because we need a specific strategy for working with individuals in the jails, because logistics are different and so forth. And then there's the program outside the jails. So in the jails, really the three partnership entities are the Sheriff's Department, our community partners, which are boots on the ground, and then the Registrar's Office and an organization called ODR, which is Office of Diversion and Reentry, and they're the county agency that really helps individuals once they are released from the jail. So we play sort of the role as the hub, where we connect the partners to the sheriffs. We assist the sheriffs with best practices, logistical needs. And this works really well because the sheriffs aren't always comfortable talking to the partnership organizations. A lot of times, and I don't think this is a surprise to anyone, the sheriffs and partnership organizations can be on opposite sides of the table in terms of justice-related issues, not related to voting, but other situations. So the registrar's office, we have that relationship with the community organizations where we can play that bridge. At the same time, we have the relationship with the sheriff's department because they trust us because we're a county agency. We speak the county language, and they can convey to us challenges that we can then explain to the organizations, and we can all work together on how to make it work the best. So I'm not going to go through all these bullet points. But the sheriff department has logistical needs. They do the background checks and so forth. So anything logistics or access related. The partners interact with the community. They provide the voice. And one thing I really wanted to emphasize at the bottom there is building trust. As partners begin working with the sheriff's department and they work positively and collaboratively, that trust begins to build. Just like we've fostered relationships with community organizations on a variety of other voter-related activities, we've built that trust, and they trust us, the sheriff trusts us, and it's all about building that trust, building those connections, and making sure everyone's communicating. Similarly, outside the jails, everyone plays their role, but it's a little more free-form, probably a little more traditional to what people expect in terms of civic engagement, because you're not restricted by a jail system where there's limited access, and how people get ballots varies and so forth. So I'm not going to go through all these bullet points, but if you do want this information, I'm happy to provide it to anybody. Okay. I'm getting the hook, so I'm going to just spend one final minute, and then I'll pass on the clicker. One of the things we did was develop voter materials that we then gave out to county agencies. Individuals at county agencies, they're not always clear on who's eligible, who's not eligible. We put together easy to follow information. We put together booklets that explains the county's directive. And these are materials used by county agencies, not by community organizations, although we're happy to share them if they would like. But really this gives frontline staff directive and understanding of what are the rules, when best to offer voter registration, what's the county's board motion, and so forth. Couple final things just to mention what we can accomplish when we all work together. We've increased registration of the incarcerated populations. We create and implement a new county program within 2 months, where if you work for a county, that's actually a pretty big accomplishment that we're really proud of. We trained 91 offices, over 400 staff across the county. When we've increased communication and really been that bridge that brings everyone together. And here's some pictures from some events. We did a National Voter Registration Day in front of the jails. The rapper Common came out and spoke, and we got national coverage. I can't promise that Common will come to your county, but it's a great way to really highlight and bring some additional additional spokespeople into the event and get some additional attention. So I think we're not doing questions right now, but if anyone would like to contact me separately, feel free. I always like talking about the work that the county does. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those details, Jeff. And I know we'll circle back and talk about that a little bit more closely. Brendan, can you please tell us about the VoiCE program in Alameda?
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Brendan Woods. I'm the Public Defender of Alameda County. So we have a voter registration program that I guess started from what I would call lack of information or misconception. And it came from our clients asking us if they could vote. And often we as criminal defense lawyers like, I don't know, we had to go look it up. And we'd advise them whether they could or couldn't. And often they would think, well, I had a misdemeanor conviction, so I couldn't vote. Or I'm on misdemeanor probation, so I couldn't vote. Or I'm on felony probation, so I couldn't vote. And it was extremely disheartening to hear about this large segment of the population, mostly black and brown people, who could actually vote and participate, who did not believe that they could. So that's how we got our program started. And when I became the public defender, I'm like, okay, I want to do this. I want to get out there and start registering people to vote. And I came up with this great acronym and this great name for a program. And I wrote it down, I had this big plan, and I did it. And then it sat on my desk for about a year and a half. It did. Until a social worker in my office and an attorney came up and said, hey, Brendan, we got an idea. I'm like, great, I got an idea too. And so that's how we got started. Our program is called VOICE. It stands for Voting Outreach Increases Community Engagement. And so the first step in getting our program started was that social worker and attorney went and approached the sheriff. And I was a little bit reluctant. I have not had the best relationship with the sheriff's office, being the public defender. The main sheriffs, we did not always see eye to eye on, I would say, 9 out of 10 issues. But it did end up working out. It turns out there was a sheriff in the inmate services who was actually really, really supportive. And he said, this is a great idea. We've been trying to do it in the jail ourselves, and it has not worked well. I'm happy to support you guys. I'll give you access, but honestly, I am not convinced it's going to work. He was not very optimistic. So in 2016, he gave us access to the jail for 2 days in October. Over those 2 days, we registered 173 people to vote. Boom, right? Okay. So how does it work? We have a team of social workers, investigators, and lawyers who volunteer. We can take about 8 to 10 people out to the jail at a time. And of course, before they go out, they have to be trained. So we have a total group of about 30 people from our office who volunteer. One of the benefits of having public defenders, investigators, and social workers, people in our office volunteer, we have access. There's no security clearance. It's all done at time of hire because we go into the jail all the time. So we have almost unfiltered access. We get in automatically. So with regards to registering people to vote, everyone who goes into the jail has to be trained to register people. We worked it out through our ROV. We have 3 master trainers. They've gone to the ROV, they've done a training, and they can now train our volunteers. Our trainers have to get trained every other year. So when we do this training for our people who volunteer, it's done after work hours from 5:30 to 6:30. I do provide food and beverages, and we train them on really basic information. How does the registration work? How does the form need to be filled out? And kind of what to expect when you actually go into the jail. So one thing that's kind of critical for us as we go in, we've kind of worked it out and what works best. We first try to do it several ways, and I guess there are 4 ways we've done it. We've done it by going to the visiting lines, which for us did not work very well, and I'll explain why. We've done it by going to classrooms in the jail. We've done it by going to resource fairs at the jail. And the best way it's worked for us is going to the actual units. We've arranged it with the sheriff's office that they dedicate a sheriff for us for half a day that accompanies us from 8 o'clock to 2 o'clock and takes us to 4 or 5 units at the jail. Just looking at this quickly, we tried to do the visiting lines and it failed miserably because the sheriff wouldn't let us talk to people when they were in line. We tried to do the classrooms. It didn't work well because the guys in class were really focused on learning as opposed to registering to vote. The resource fairs were great, but we had limited access and only about 50 people registered during that time. So just real quickly, when we go in, how it works is we go into the units and we just make an announcement. And I say, hi, I'm Brendan Woods. I have to yell because the guys are all sleeping most of the time. I'm Brendan Woods, public defender. and I'm here to register you to vote. You know, we believe as an office that those close to the problem, close to the solutions. And then guys are like, huh, what? And then we come out and we said, a lot of reasons why you're here in custody now is because laws that are passed, okay? And you can have a real impact on the outcome. You have a voice, it's important, it needs to be heard. And just the guys come out and they're like, I want to vote. And so we sit down at tables, we register them to vote. And one of the big issues that's been alluded to earlier is just figuring out how they're going to get their actual ballot. That's a big issue. So when we sit down and talk to someone, first thing we do is establish, do you know when you're going to get out of custody? Are you going to be in custody at the time of the election, right? If you're going to be in custody at the time of the election, you request to vote by mail, and the sheriff has now delivered the ballots to our clients in custody. Okay? We've also set up so we take the registrations, we deliver them to the ROV, and then, excuse me, when the ballots are sent, the inmates complete them, and there's a dedicated sheriff who goes out, collects them, and then delivers them to the ROV. I think our biggest issue that we have right now is tracking who actually votes and gets the ballots. So just to wrap it up, when we go in, we talk to people, there are things we don't do. One thing is we don't specifically advise people on case specifics as to whether they're eligible to vote. We do a general. If you're on parole or serving time in prison, you can't vote. That's about it. We do not offer advice on your legal case. I mean, they always want to talk to us. We are attorneys coming in and say, can we talk about a case? Like, no, I can't talk about the case in this capacity. I'll come see you later on. And finally, we don't weigh in on political issues. We don't advise them in regards to, don't vote for Trump. We don't do that. We do offer assistance with regards to helping them complete the forms. So right now, every time we go into jail, we average about 94 people registering when we go in. So our program's been in existence for a short period of time. In 2018, we registered 425 people to vote right before the elections. So it's been a great program. We're a total of about 633 people to vote overall. I'm happy to answer any questions. I think it's one of the best things we've done. And the amount of positive feedback and mail we get from clients that we've registered is crazy. It's like, Mr. Wood, you gave me power. And I'm not sure if there's something more gratifying than that. So thank you.
Thank you for that, and thank you for framing why voting is important for everyone, including people who are incarcerated. Jen, can you tell us about the program that you have in Chicago?
No? Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thank you. My name is Jen Dean. I'm the Deputy Director of Chicago Votes. So our program, Cook County Jail Votes, which has expanded into a ton of advocacy work since then, really started with the idea of how do we hold judges accountable, which is a little bit out of the blue given this topic. But I used to go to court with our young people, and it was really upsetting to see how quickly our young people were sentenced, how there was such a lack of diversity of judges on the bench, and also the quality of judges. Fun facts, there's no training. Once you're elected, you just become a judge. And judges are an elected position. So going through that work, we thought about how do we hold them accountable? Well, the number one rule of organizing is to make sure that the people who are most impacted by that issue are front and center. So that is people who are inside prisons and jails. So how do we then activate them? Get them registered to vote. So the voting is just one step in the greater scheme of our framework for systemic change. And so our program is really ran through a grassroots level and then a legislative support for our grassroots work as well. So in Cook County Jail, we focus on voter education as a key part of this. We literally go tier to tier and talk to people about who is on the ballot, why they should vote, how, frequently asked questions, myths. So we hear all the time, I have a felony, I can't vote, and that's not true in Illinois. And then also for statewide, in prisons, people can't vote in Illinois, but what we can do is educate people. So we are inside prisons as well, doing law and policy classes, actually having people write legislation from the inside, which is pretty cool. We also are doing voter registration, so we are at about 4,000 people registered in Cook County Jail in about a year and a half. When we go in, we bring between 50 and about 60 people each time we go into the jail once a month, but we are switching our tactics there to about 15 people each time we go in. And then also, all of our volunteers are trained as deputy registrars, meaning our election authority trains them on how to do voter registration. That way, if somebody wasn't paying attention and they get all crazy and partisan in jail, I can say, I didn't train them, the Board of Elections did. So that's a good tip to cover yourself, is to actually have deputy registrars in the jails. And then they also go through a Cook County Jail 101 training with me that's about 3 hours long. So they are experts by the time they're in the jail. We also do an absentee ballot application program. So not only do we register folks, but we are there to help them fill out their ballot application, which then allows them to have a ballot in the jail. So we run a ballot application program through in-person voting. So the systems, we have personal private booths, all of that, but they're using a absentee ballot application. And there's about 6,000 each time they go into the jail. So the jail sends a list to the Board of Elections of all the eligible voters inside the jail, which is about 94% of the jail. The Board of Elections then prepares envelopes with those ballot applications. And then we are the ones who then go to the jail. I sort 6,000 of them by tier and division and name. And then we literally go tier to tier to tier to have people fill them out. We also support this through legislation. So, and then in-person voting. So we also are the ones who write down the actual logistics for how movement is gonna be inside the jail, what lunch looks like, how are we gonna sort ballots the night before. All of that falls on my plate. So I'm the one who makes sure that everybody's on the same page with that. And then our legislation. So we have HB 2541, which is civics in jail. Civics in prison. And then SB 2090, which is voting in jail. Both pieces of legislation, which we'll get into after, support all the grassroots work that we're doing, because if I decide I don't want to do this anymore, it's really important that this work continues. And the reality is the election authority and the jail should really be the ones who are doing this work. We shouldn't be the ones doing it. So we're the ones who go in, set it up, make sure there's a systems of accountability, and then people should do their jobs. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jen. So to follow up on some of what was raised before, and this is for Jeff and Daisy in particular, but it's really open to any of the panelists. It seems like it takes a lot of different parties working together to make these programs work. And how have you been able to get elections officials and jails to buy into these programs? And why do you think that's important?
I can start off, and I want to kind of piggyback off of something that Jen just mentioned, but before I get there, in Orange County, we've encountered a lot of issues. So I think it's extremely important to have the buy-in of the jail officials. Without their buy-in, trying to gain access to the facilities to do this work is extremely difficult, which, as I mentioned earlier, is why we had to kind of resort in that particular county to engage in different types of activities. The role that I see both the jail officials and the election agency playing currently is a role of a thought partner, where we can coordinate efforts, troubleshoot, share information and data to improve things moving forward. However, going back to the point that Jen made that I think is extremely important, is the ultimate goal is to move towards institutionalizing these efforts so that it's not contingent on one particular jail official or one particular election agency official saying, yes, I agree with the importance of this work, and therefore I'll be okay with you all doing it. And then years later, that person is no longer in that role and the systems are not in place to ensure that the work can continue. So I think it's extremely important to ensure that the systems are set in place so regardless of who's occupying those spaces, folks that are entitled to vote can be able to do so.
So speaking from LA County's perspective, the sheriffs, a lot of times they may be in favor of running a program, or they may have some concerns with part of a program. Regardless of the level of concern, the great partnership that we have is that they can come to us and say, you know, I'm not sure if all these individuals should be coming into the jails, or we're not comfortable handling this part of the process, and we can talk it out with them. And it's not that they don't want to do it, it's that they don't want to be put in uncomfortable situations or be accused of anything inappropriate, and so they really sometimes default to running things sort of as what they would call by the book. And kind of a real example of what I'm talking about, if that's not entirely clear, is a couple of years ago, they were concerned about organizations coming in and interacting with the, interacting with the inmates and providing voter registration because it's a security issue. So we can sit down and talk to them, and it's not that they don't want to promote voter registration, they have concerns about security, and we can walk through their concerns and see how to mitigate those concerns. Another situation that kept coming up is they would get accused of questionable behavior in terms of one-on-one interactions with the inmates, which I don't think is any surprise to anyone in this room that those questions can come up. And when those questions were popping up, the ACLU was getting a lot more involved with our side of the program, and this made a natural connection because now we could take the sheriff out of the role of having to interact with the inmates. The ACLU can come in, they can be trained by the sheriff so they know the do's and don'ts and how proper engagement should be conducted in terms of security and so forth, and everyone can work together to really improve the program, and the sheriffs really just provide the acts without having to do the interaction with the inmates. And I think that's been one of the keys to our partnership and really growing the program, is that we've been able to have everyone play these different roles and increase communication.
If I can add one more point. So Jeff talked about also communication, and that's extremely important. In Orange County, when we first embarked on the work and we're in the planning stages in 2016, at the end of 2016, 2017, one of the things that we found is the Sheriff's Department in Orange County had a policy in place. So the policy basically says if you're incarcerated and you would like to vote, you have to write to the Register of Voters and request a voter registration application. The address that was on their policy had been outdated for some time. So that really showcased to us the minimal kind of communication and collaboration that was happening. Basically, the ROV was providing the Sheriff's Department with packets of voter registration applications, but besides that, there was really no coordination or communication that was happening. So we have no idea how many folks may have written, requesting a voter registration application, and that just not going attended to because of an outdated policy.
Thank you. Oh yeah, sure, definitely.
I'm just going to add one. Can you hear me? Yes. No. Yes. There we go. Just add one thing. Don't be scared to ask. I started the program and I was scared I was going to get a no. I thought because the sheriff and I had some very public disagreements, and it's going to be a no. We asked. We started the program. My team had a meeting with the head last week, and they want to expand it. They want to give us more access and set up more dates. And so I say, don't be scared to ask, and you might find partners in places you didn't expect to find partners.
So I want to ask more in a minute about ways that sheriffs in particular partnering with sheriffs can help you overcome some of the special logistical barriers that exist in jails. But before I do that, I want to ask about volunteers. I know that some of your programs work with volunteers, and it's a critical part. And then Brendan, I know that you've been able to not rely as heavily on volunteers, although I have one specific question from the audience that said, Brendan, how can I volunteer with your program? So for those who use volunteers, how do you train them? What role do you see volunteers playing in registering and educating people in jails?
Our program, I thought that I needed 1,000 volunteers, but you don't. And I actually ended up getting too many volunteers to the point my inbox crazy flooded, and I wasn't able to do my work as efficiently. So that's a good warning, is don't think you need 1 million people to do this work. Quality is way better than quantity. and also using volunteers for specific things. So it's good to have a big base, but use your base for signatures, for witness slips, to show up to the Board of Elections if they say no, right? So use your base, but also for the people who are actually inside the jail, it's really important that they understand the laws that are associated with so that they can advocate for themselves to be in the jail and also for the people who are detained. We train people on how to de-escalate, so that's a huge thing to make sure you're not raising your voice in jail, you're never gonna argue with an officer, you're in their house. Making sure that we have jail leaders inside the jail, and then also how do you actually communicate with officers? How do you explain to them what a voter registration form is in the most simplest terms? And then the biggest thing is don't get sued. So make sure that liability forms, both on the jail side and on our side, are filled out. Make sure that the big thing is labels. So the language that people are using inside of the jail is super important. Saying things, even like detainees, convicts, felons, criminals, it's just not necessary. Refer to people as voters. They are voters. So that also helps when you're talking to the election authority in the jail. You're talking about voters. You're not talking about people who are detained. And that has helped a lot with especially talking to legislators. So in pretrial detention, people in Cook County Jail have the exact same voting rights as I do. And so to have people draw that correlation and to stop othering people is a really big part of our volunteer training.
Yeah, I wanted to mention volunteers play a big part, not just within the jails and working with Daisy's organization or other community organizations that go inside, but outside the jails. And we're here talking about re-enfranchisement. And in Los Angeles County, there's 40,000 adults that go through the probation system. And one big challenge is that the news is always dominated by some of the most restrictive states, right? Florida and Texas, for example. We hear that all the time. And so people don't necessarily know their rights. So organizations and volunteers can play a huge role. When we rolled out this program to the probation department recently, there's a lot of probation field offices, and you could tell they're kind of feeling overwhelmed by, oh, well, this is one more thing that we now have to do, offer voter registration. The community group stepped up and said, you know what, we'll go down to your probation office. Can we sit there with a table and talk to families, talk to individuals coming into this office? And they were so excited that someone stepped up, because that's taking a little bit of the load off the probation offices and the staff that work there. And so the role, going back to the role that really the registrar plays, is that, when we hear that, we try to make everything turnkey as possible. Great, you want to go out, we'll supply you everything, we'll provide you the materials, we'll train you. You just have to show up and do and register folks. So think creatively about how volunteers can really be used, and how widespread you can really engage those volunteers with individuals who can be re-engaged civically and energized that way.
And just to add, I agree with everything Jeff and Jen shared. One of the things that we had to focus on in Orange County, we were doing education. A lot of our volunteers themselves were unaware that many of the folks on the inside were still eligible to vote. So it's providing that kind of educational component to them. We also had part of our training involved people-centered language and ensuring that folks that are engaging with impacted families out in the visitor lines weren't perpetuating certain terms or doing things that is counterproductive to our goals and the work that we do. The other thing that I wanted to mention briefly is also the role of, and I think there's going to be a question about this, and maybe we can segue to that, of impacted folks in that space. So a lot of our volunteers that were doing the voter ed and registration post-release and at the visitor lines were actually folks that were impacted themselves, either currently had a loved one behind bars or at some point in the past were themselves incarcerated. So that's extremely important, not only once you're in the implementation stage, but at all stages of this work. When you're in the planning stage, when you're putting together materials, it's extremely important to center the leadership and the voices of those that are most impacted.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to add anything about the role that impacted people can play in programs?
So for us, especially with our civics and prison work, they are doing everything. So we enter Stateville Prison weekly, which is a maximum security prison, and the guys that we work with mostly have life sentences. And they are actually the ones who drafted HB 2541. Which is calling for civics in prison. So they'll get 3 90-minute sessions on their way out into society, covering government, voting systems, and current events. So don't underestimate the level of education that people have just because they're currently detained. They can write laws too, and they should be. So any work that I do goes back to them. So our bill actually just made it out of the House and it's going on to the Senate. But any amendments that we make, I go back to Stateville and I ask permission from the people detained if I can make that amendment. So they're the ones who are really driving all of the work, and they should always be the ones front and center.
Great, thank you. So as we've mentioned, there are a number of unique barriers that exist physically and procedurally for people who are incarcerated if they want to register and vote. Jeff and Brendan, or anyone, can you talk about what some of those barriers are and how you've accounted for those in designing and executing these programs?
Yeah, so in LA County, there's definitely some barriers. Some we've been able to resolve, and some we're still working to figure out the best approach. You know, I think it's important to not ignore the details. Details are really important. So our office, previously with our vote by mail ballot, so every person who registers in the jails fills out a vote by mail application at the same time, and both of those items come back to our office. If we're not ready to produce the vote by mail ballot yet, we set it aside. And so the unit that produces all that information and all those materials, they have a special processing, and it gets flagged and it gets set aside. It used to be that when we prepped a vote by mail packet, there were staples in the booklet, right? The sample ballot booklet. And they had to be prepped separately because no staples in the jails. So that's an example of one little detail you can't really ignore, because if you tried to send that to the jails, those are all going to get returned as not acceptable. So they prepped those sample ballots a little bit differently. Now we have a new vote by mail ballot. We moved from the booklet and a little card that would come, which was essentially the ballot, to a full-faced ballot. So we've eliminated the booklet, and that's no longer an issue. Another issue that we had, just to give you another example, was with a jail system as large as LA County, someone could register to vote, be transferred to another facility, be released, any number of things can happen. So we talked to the Secretary of State's office for some advice on what we could put on the vote by mail application, and we worked internally and we came up with a process where we put the booking number now on the vote by mail ballot. So it's easy for the sheriff to look up that inmate by their booking number and then get the ballot efficiently to those individuals. So those are some examples. There's been other situations we've been able to resolve. The one issue that we haven't been able to resolve, and it's a challenge, is when someone registers for the first time, including their driver's license number or the last 4 digits of their social security number. And for a lot of individuals, they may not know that information. And if you're not in jail, what happens is you get sent a letter, and you can get that letter and you can give that information at a later date. But that's not really possible for someone incarcerated. So what I usually, during training, even though I never would tell someone not to register someone, I really stress the importance of letting them know we need to really get that information. Otherwise, it can present issues, and it may prevent the person from actually voting their ballot once they finally receive it. And we've even been working with the Sheriff's Department to make announcements when individuals are going to show up, maybe the day before. If you're interested in registering to vote, you'll need to have this information, so if you need to get it, and so forth. So there's ways we're trying to proactively work around that issue, but there are still challenges that exist.
Just briefly, with regards to barriers for us, one of the reasons we don't have volunteers externally from the office, we have such a hard time getting them to clear security and clear security clearance. Our jail is very difficult with regards to that. They require like a 30-day, a 45-day time period before that. And then we've been in ongoing dialogue for what feels like forever with regards to getting people, returning citizens formerly incarcerated, to be able to get security access to go in with us. Our sheriff has been very reluctant to do that. They don't give them access. Anyone with felony conviction can't come in and provide services. So it's been a real ongoing dialogue, and we've had a lot of pushback there. One of the weird things is we can't bring pens in. You can bring pens in when you're an attorney going for a contact visit, but you can't bring it in when you're going to register people to vote. So they have special pens that you have to use. Well, I think one of our biggest issues is the voter guides, because the voter guides have staples. They don't go into the jail. We've been having long talks about that. How can we get them? They want to have one in a central location. We met with them yesterday, and there's a new proposal with regards to having be available on iPads. And I'm like, oh, that might be a way to get around it. So those have been our issues.
If I can add 2 issues, something that came up for us in Orange County was when folks were receiving their ballots on the inside or even completing the voter registration application. On the application itself, it says blue or black ink. So people were writing to us, right, which was taking up time, and it's like, you know, these things that we take for granted on the outside, saying like, well, just grab a pen to fill this out, saying, if I don't complete it in blue or black ink, is it going to get kicked back? Or some folks that were just discouraged, and, you know, deputies aren't going to hand me a pen to do this. Another one was the postage, right? On the ballot, so on the ballot it said there's like an area where you can add postage. So, you know, we had to communicate to them after being in consultation with the Register of Voters that they could send it out and that it would make it to the election agency without the postage. But folks that did not have money on their books, some of them opted to not send it out for fear that it just wasn't going to go anywhere.
Sure. Yeah, we have a little bit less than, we have 2 minutes left.
So just really quick, I think the overall, at least from an election administrator's perspective, is I invite everyone down to our office so they can talk to the different units that do these operations. So our community partners, I invite them to come down and talk to the unit that preps the vote by mail ballot so they can tell them the challenges they've faced and how we can all work together. Same thing with the sheriff. I walk everyone through the process, have them meet the different managers in our department who handle the different areas of responsibility, and then we just lay everything out because we all want the same thing, right? We want it to be done easily. So just that's a kind of parting advice.
So in the last few minutes that we have, I wanted to make sure that we make time to talk about the legislation that's pending. So Jen, you've mentioned some of the legislation that's in Illinois. Daisy, can you tell us what AB 787 is and how it would affect your work?
Yes, so AB 787 was introduced earlier this year by Assemblymember Gibson, and what it would do, it would require local jails to grant access to organizations to the inside to do voter ed and registration. So in a county like Orange, that would be extremely beneficial for groups that are trying to do the work. Another thing that the bill would do, it would shift responsibilities of kind of like information sharing from the Superior Court in every county to the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. So CDCR would now be responsible for providing the California Secretary of State a list of individuals that are in the state prison system, a list of individuals that are currently on parole, a list of folks that have been released from the state prison system, and a list of folks that have discharged parole. They would have to be reporting that information to the SOS on a weekly basis. The California Secretary of State would then have 3 days to relay that info over to respective counties. The local election agencies in each county would then be required to, one, cancel affidavits for individuals that are no longer eligible to vote. But something that would be new is that now the local election agency would also be required to notify folks that have been released from prison and folks that have discharged parole that their right to vote has been restored, and also provide information about how they can go about to get registered. The bill went before the Public Safety Committee yesterday and it passed, so it's on its way to the Appropriations Committee. The bill is supported by, the bill is sponsored by New Way of Life, who has done amazing work in terms of increasing access to voting for folks that are in custody and formerly incarcerated individuals under the leadership of Susan Burton. So it would be amazing if folks could submit letters of support moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And just in the couple minutes that we have left, another bill that was heard yesterday in Assembly elections was AB 646, which is related to ACA 6. And we talked earlier about what the rights are that people have right now. So you can't vote if you're on parole in California presently, but this legislation would change that. It would restore the right to vote to people on parole. Jeff, from the perspective of an elections official, how would this affect the outreach that you do? And Brendan, from the perspective of a public defender, how do you think this would affect people's reentry from prison?
So I can just give a real quick answer, and in terms of 787, LA County actually does have a support position on that. The other one, we have a watch position. We're evaluating the impact of how it'll affect our operations, so we don't generally take a policy position. That's something for the Board of Supervisors to decide. But in terms of our department, we're looking at any ways that things can be more seamlessly processed, eliminate confusion, and just help operationally, because as we're talking about now, there's a lot of different factors and variables that affect how we process everything. So the official position of the county is watch, but we are eager to evaluate and see how it'll affect us operationally.
So just quickly, there's something about having a civic duty that makes you just want to naturally be a better citizen. If we talk about civic engagement, that is really necessary for reentry, for reintegration, and rehabilitation. So if we think about the people that we're talking about here, people with past histories or past criminal records, they have been so marginalized by society. They've been treated like an other their whole time, almost their whole life. And ABA 6, this law, allowing people who are on parole, and I think even in prison, is a way of saying to them that you are part of our community, you are not an other, your voice matters, you mean something, and your voice counts. And that's where we should be going as a civilized nation. And so, yeah,
Thank you. Someone wanted to share that postage is no longer an issue in California, but of course mail processing times can be for people who are incarcerated. Did you want to add something?
No, yeah, I actually brought 2 letters of folks that wrote to us after receiving our materials. I don't know if we have enough time for me to kind of read through at least one of them very quickly. If not, one, okay. So this person wrote to us and said, I am voting because you guys made the way for me to vote. Honestly, this is the first time I get the opportunity to do this. I agree that our democracy is at its highest stake. We currently need more access to programs here in the jail and more educational options to get our mind right and restore our values. I understand to society I'm looked down on because I am in jail, but I still have a heart and a mind, and I am human just like you. And he signed it off as your neighbor. So I want us to keep that in mind, that when we're talking about people that are currently behind bars, these are people, right? Like these are voters, like Jen said, these are human beings. And I think that should always be the first thing that comes to mind in doing this work. As election leaders and folks that are involved in increasing access to voting and ensuring that folks that have the right to vote can actually exercise that right, I think it's extremely valuable for us to think about those folks that have been historically marginalized, people who have had to encounter so many challenges throughout history to be able to do this. So thank you.
That's a beautiful way to close this out. Thank you, Daisy. I just wanted to mention on the resource table outside, we have a little 2-pager with best practices and also on the back what the current state of the law is in California around voting rights. We also have some materials from LA County and the program down there. Daisy, I think, brought some materials as well, and Jen brought some materials on their program, so we've got lots of resources out on the resource table. Thank you for being interested in this topic. Thank you to FoCE for putting on this amazing conference, and thank you to all of our incredible panelists for your amazing work and for being here.